And for more on this, we have with us Professor Robert S. Ross joining us live from Boston. He's a professor of political science at Boston College. Welcome to the show, Professor.
Good to be here. Thank you.
Now, Professor, China has dubbed the election in Taiwan clearly as a choice between peace and war. How does the United States of America, which is the biggest backer of Taiwan, and we just saw Blinken meeting a top Chinese diplomat before the Taiwan polls began, how does the U.S. view this type of rhetoric by China?
Well, the U.S. is clearly opposed to any sort of interference in Taiwan's election by the mainland. At the same time, it clearly has a preference for the, as you suggested, Lai Ching-te, the successor to the current president. This Lai Ching-te is more pro-American and more resistant to Chinese pressure. And so he would be more supportive of American overall policy in East Asia, which is primarily designed to resist the rise of China and to maintain American maritime and supremacy in the region.
Right, Professor also talked to us about how big is an issue of how big is the China factor in the Taiwan elections, or do you think that it is the domestic issues that will be playing in the minds? Because reports suggest that the young voters are more inclined towards domestic issues in Taiwan than that of China.
Well, the China issue weighs heavily on the voters of Taiwan because, after all, Taiwan is 90 miles away from the mainland, and China is perhaps the greatest military power, the greatest naval power in the Taiwan Strait. And so the fate of Taiwan rests upon the prospects for war and peace with mainland China. And so any politician that seems irresponsible or unable to manage cross-strait relations, that politician would suffer great weaknesses in any election in Taiwan. So all the candidates in this current election have tried to assure the voters that they will be responsible, they will not risk war, they will not aggravate the mainland, while simultaneously trying to also assure some of them that Taiwan will be very pro-American and resist all Chinese pressure. So the China issue weighs heavily. Now, yes, many voters may care more about domestic politics, environmental issues, social issues, but there's no doubting that the mainland factor is very powerful in Taiwan elections.
Right, Professor, the elections in Taiwan are majorly pegged on independence and unification. But let's also talk about how the results today in Taiwan, how will that impact cross-border stability?
Well, the mainland has often said that it has two objectives. The first is to deter Taiwan from declaring independence. And as you suggested, that's the war and peace issue. For should Taiwan declare independence and try and secede from China, that could be an act of war as far as the mainland is concerned, and it could engulf the United States in that war, and the damage to the global economy would be very great. But then the second mainland objective is indeed unification. Now, that's a long-term perspective, not overnight, but it wants to see the trend in the right direction, at least toward greater cooperation, toward independence over the long run. Now, for the last 8 years, Taiwan's been moving in the opposite direction. The concern is that should the successor to Tsai Ing-wen, Lai Ching-te, continue to move away from unification and consolidate Taiwan's de facto independence and consolidate Taiwan's identity as separate from the mainland will grow impatient and see the prospects for unification grow slimmer and slimmer. And that, too, could be destabilizing.
Right, Professor. Thanks very much for joining us here on WION, sharing insights with us. We'll, of course, be tracking this very closely.
Glad to join you. Thank you.